Greetings folks, and welcome to another episode of 81632-bit. I'm your host Rob, and as you'll have seen from the thumbnail today, we're going to be discussing Ocean software. Now, there's a commonly held belief on a lot of YouTube retro channels, especially those that emanate from the United States, that Ocean software was somehow the LJN of British software studios. Now, for those who don't know, LJN was a logo that if you saw it on the box of a Nintendo game in America in the late 80s and through the 90s, had a reputation for being, well, shit, basically. They just churned out games based on licenses and such, which were just generally pretty low quality. And thanks, I would say, and I will argue through this video, to a limited amount of exposure to the American market for Ocean in the console era, there's this perception that Ocean software were basically LJN but British. Now, as I've already said, I think that notion is utter nonsense, but it does play with the fact that a lot of American YouTubers seem to forget that outside of the US and the video game crash of 1983, which only really affected the American market, and then the rebirth of the American market with the NES, they forget that there was a market outside of the US and to some extent within the US for 8 and then 16-bit home microcomputers. And when you take Ocean software and look at what they produced for those, you'll actually find that there were a lot of incredibly good, incredibly high quality games released. And that's what we're going to look at here to dispel this myth that Ocean were the British LJN. So let's start looking at some of these iconic titles from Ocean that go a hell of a long way to disproving this ridiculous US-centric myth. So, first up we have a game which, certainly for gamers in the UK and Europe, is iconic on the Ocean label, and that's their adaptation of RoboCop. Now, they released RoboCop across basically every platform they could, which was a home computer in Europe. The ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64, the Amstrad, the Amiga, the Atari ST, the PC. And across all the platforms, the game was pretty darn good. Now, it was fairly generic in its attempts at converting the film to the game. It was basically a run and gun, or rather in RoboCop's case, a walk and gun with some light platforming, although the 16-bit versions for the Amiga and the ST were certainly much closer to the Data East arcade machine, which, in a strange twist of fate, was actually licensed to Data East from Ocean. And it also broke things up with a few mini-game levels, such as a level where you had to photo fit the villains, or some sort of pseudo 3D shooting into the screen. Certainly you do that at the end of the game when you defeat the final boss, and of course you get to partake in one of RoboCop's most iconic scenes where the would-be assaulter gets shot in the groin. Now, this game reviewed incredibly well at the time, and to be fair, given the limitations of the machines it's on, it still holds up incredibly well today, and it was massively popular. And when I say massively popular, I mean huge. This game dominated the charts for months afterwards, and yeah, it's a great game, not an LJN game at all, an actual great piece of software. But it wasn't the only time that Ocean produced a great game, as you will see momentarily. Now, the next game I'm going to go with here is Ocean's home computer conversions of the Batman the Movie license. Now, obviously, in 1989, Batmania was everywhere. Tim Burton's Batman was coming out in the cinema, it was getting rave reviews, people loved it, and Ocean, as was often the case at the time, had the license to produce the game. And much like RoboCop, they produced another excellent title. Again, this is more of a platform game really, but it does also feature some alternative levels where you drive the Batmobile and the Batplane. Now, obviously, these are going to be different between the 8 and 16-bit versions, whereas the 8-bit versions were simple side-scrolling affairs. The 16-bit versions, when you got behind the wheel of the Batmobile and the Batplane, were proper into the screen, almost like a racing game type gameplay. Now, to say this was a big deal would be an understatement, and to say the game was considered to be quite good would also be quite an understatement. In fact, Commodore themselves licensed the Batman game for a packing with the Amiga, the legendary Batman pack, and I think it's fair to say that the Amiga A500 Batman pack probably sold more Commodore Amigas than just about any other pack that they produced. It was that darn important to them. Now, this wasn't the only excellent Batman game that Ocean was involved with. In years previous to this, they'd produced an excellent isometric 3D game simply called Batman, and also the really rather incredible looking comic book game Batman the Caped Crusader, both of which looked at Batman from a different perspective, more of his detective phase, and again were both excellent titles, highly rated at the time and still very highly rated today. Of course, there were many other excellent games that Ocean produced during the 80s and 90s, such as Chase HQ, especially the Sinclair Spectrum version, which was an outstanding arcade conversion. You've also had games like Rainbow Islands, all the versions of which, for the home computers that Ocean produced, were excellent conversions of the arcade machine. There were original titles as well, such as the legendary Head Over Heels, one of the first isometric 3D games, and to this day still one of the best. You see, it really is a ridiculous notion that Ocean ever produced rubbish games. Let's be honest, they were probably the biggest software house in Europe during the 80s and early 90s. They dominated the European market on home computers especially. They produced masses of games, so obviously there were going to be games which frankly were rubbish. This stands to reason. You can't put out as much product as Ocean did over the length of time that Ocean did and have every single title be excellent. That's just not possible. So yes, there were stinkers, such as their Addams Family license, which did appear on home computers and the big consoles of the day. And yes, to be fair, the console versions were pretty rubbish. No one can deny that. But again, this is just the nature of the beast. When you produce that many games, you are going to produce some rubbish. So the idea that Ocean are the LJN of Great Britain is frankly nonsense. They produce plenty of high quality games, as I've mentioned in this video, and there are many others. It's easy enough to get out there, get onto your preferred search engine and find them. Just do some actual research for yourself instead of relying on what some, Gen Z YouTuber says about games that they've never actually played, but they've heard the accepted wisdom that Ocean are the LJN of Europe. No, that's far too simplistic, and frankly it does Ocean and many of the talented coders that worked for them over the years a massive disservice. Anyway, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. If you want to help the channel out, do hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. You can ring the bell to be notified of upcoming videos. If you really want to support the channel, you can donate through the Ko-fi page, or you can become a member either here on YouTube or through my Patreon page. The links will be shown in the end card at the end of the video. As usual, I'm going to thank my current supporters Left Back and Old Scott Retro for their continued support of the channel. And yeah, that's it. So this is Rob. This is 81632-bit. and I will see you folks on the next video. Bye bye.